following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages.
Good evening and welcome to Business Best. This is a platform where we showcase the best in the business, and we will be introducing to you people who have excelled in their particular field in order to showcase the latest developments in their particular industry. So today on the show we have the International Institute of Health Sciences, or the IIHS, pioneer of healthcare education in South Asia, as it has launched its new venture, International School of Western Australia, or the ISWA, which offers the Australian A-levels for the first time in Sri Lanka. The qualification is Western Australian Certificate of Education, or the WACE, awarded by the Western Australia School Curriculum Standards Authority, the SCSA. WACE is also a two-year program covering year 11 and 12. So today on the show we have Mr. Carl Jones, Director International Marketing and Development of IIHS. So to give a brief introduction to Mr. Carl Jones, he has years of experience in the education and marketing in prestigious universities, including Deakin University, Australia. Mr. Jones has represented Deakin University at industry, community and government events, and has been a regular presenter on international education, marketing and career development in various international forums. His work has seen him recognized with university awards in 2014 and 2019. He is also the founder and managing director of Study Village, a student mentoring service operating in the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Mr. Jones is currently reading for his PhD in international education at Deakin University, and today he is joining us from all the way from Melbourne in Australia. And good evening to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Mr. Carl, as I understand, you worked for Deakin University as international manager for a number of years, and your work has brought you to Sri Lanka many times, if I'm not mistaken, around 35 times in fact. So do you think Sri Lankan students, how do you think Sri Lankan students fare in Australia at the moment? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. I've been lucky enough, as you say, to travel to Sri Lanka many times, and then also meet them when they arrive in Melbourne. And it's been a real privilege, actually. Quite often I meet them at a stage where they're very excited, but they're really taking a jump into the unknown. And I typically meet them with their parents. And yeah, as I say, it's been a real privilege to see that transition that they make as they arrive. The little secret, I guess, is that when they do arrive in Australia, there's such a cultural affinity, I think, between Sri Lankans and Australians. I'm not quite sure what it is, whether it's our perhaps friendly, casual approach, perhaps. We laugh at the same things, but Sri Lankans tend to be very popular at Australian campuses and with Australian employers. And once they find their feet, they tend to do very well. There's certainly a great respect for universities and academia generally, I guess, that Sri Lankans have, and so they tend to prosper in research areas and also work at universities too, which is something really quite remarkable. They fit in well. I think they disproportionately win scholarships at a greater rate than some other sort of national cohorts do. So generally speaking, the experience is extremely positive. At Deakin, in the time I was there, we were very fortunate to receive a great number of Sri Lankan students. But now, of course, they don't just come to Melbourne, they come to all cities in Australia and find, as I say, tremendous success.
All right, Mr. Carr, my next question for you. Well, IIHS is well known for healthcare education programs in South Asia. What is the new venture of Australian also? Like, how do you see this coming into play in Sri Lanka?
International School of Western Australia?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, this is really exciting, and it's certainly part of the reason that I've decided to join IIHS. This is the first time that an Australian high school curriculum will be offered onshore in Colombo. And so, as we've discussed, Australian university education has been very, very popular for Sri Lankans for 5, 10, 15 years now. But this is the first time where Sri Lankans will have the opportunity to experience a real taste of Australian education pre-university. And the waste model is very, very interesting. So the Western Australian government for many years has been very entrepreneurial in terms of teaching its curriculum offshore. I think it's taught there for about 20, 25 years in places like China and Malaysia, but more recently Vietnam and other places. And it's proved a very, very useful option for international students. Whether they're interested in getting into an Australian university, obviously it's ideally suited to that, but also it's very portable, so it's recognised by lots of universities all over the world, almost all of them really. So there's that terrific advantage, but also it's an opportunity for Sri Lankans to experience Australian learning styles and get an insight into Australian culture and the Australian approach before university hits. So it's really quite unique, a big privilege personally to be involved in the project.
All right, Mr. Carl, what makes International School of Western Australia an attractive proposition for high school students?
Yeah, well, as I say, it's the first time that this Western Australian curriculum has been offered in Colombo, in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
And it has such a strong track record. But the other interesting thing is the combination of the partnership with IIHS. So IIHS has been around for about 20 years on the Sri Lankan education landscape, and I've known them for about 10 years. And has been most striking for me is the quality of graduates that IIHS. I've seen them at the other end. I've seen them joining institutions like Deakin University and others. And there's something really quite special, I think, about the formula at IIHS. There's a real openness, there's a curiosity, there's an enthusiasm to learn more about the world. That make IIHS students very popular, but also willing to try different things when they hit Australian shores. And if that formula can be translated into the secondary school education scene, I think it's a really, really powerful formula that sets up young Sri Lankans for prosperous careers, whether that's offshore or if they remain in Sri Lanka.
All right, Mr. Carl. So what's the benefit of Western Australian High School in the curriculum?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so Australian education generally has been has thankfully had a good reputation again at the tertiary level for years now. But I think a lot of those values and approaches certainly translate into the secondary education sector too. They really are about openness, about willingness to try different things. There's in Australia, as you would probably know, Australian cities tend to have the highest livability indexes in the world. So Australia has an education system which is sort of comparable with some of the best in the world per capita, but also has this really interesting sort of blend of lifestyle benefits as well. And that certainly translates into life in Australia. But as the waste model has proved in other places, that approach to education is highly transportable, and really makes it as a tremendous advantage for students undertaking the Australian curriculum. So yeah, there's all those benefits. I guess what sets the Australian curriculum apart really is this emphasis on soft skills. So Australian secondary education and tertiary education is really known for developing those skills around group work and communication and working up with others to achieve team goals. Australian institutions are really known for making their graduates what we call job ready. So they really have that breadth of skills that are going to set them up well, so the world of work is not such a shock. So again, Australia is known for its producing adaptable graduates, and really as the world of work becomes more complex and unpredictable, it's that adaptability that really sets Australian graduates apart.
Right, Mr. Carl. So what is the factor that you would say is the most exciting? Why did you want to introduce this in the first place?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think obviously, my enthusiasm about IIHS and the utility of Australian education has been long-standing, of course, but I haven't seen it work in the secondary school sector, and I know. The British curriculum is certainly a much better known quantity in Sri Lanka. You would be aware that Australia and the UK have a friendly, competitive relationship, and I really think I'd like to see this curriculum really succeed and this model succeed, because I do think it offers Sri Lankans a much easier and more effective and efficient transition to transition from an Australian high school curriculum into an Australian university curriculum. It's obviously more natural, so I think we're bringing a real value add to the market. And of course, it's a new venture, but it's a venture where there's very experienced hands involved, and so I think, I know it will succeed, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it work and us producing some fantastic outcomes in terms of graduates.
Right, thank you, Mr. Carl. We'll have to go into a short commercial break. We'll be back soon. Stay with us. You're watching Business Best. Welcome back to Business Best, and we are in discussion with Mr. Carl Jones, who is the Director of Marketing and Development, the International Marketing and Director of the IIHS Institute. Mr. Carl, thank you very much again for joining with us on the show, and you gave a very good insight about what your program is you have about the future of Sri Lankan students and about introducing the Australian curriculum into our country. So my next question for you is, what do you believe sets Australian high school education apart?
Oh, good question, and I think we touched on it before. It really is this openness to new ideas. I mean, Australia, certainly in its recent European history, is a very young country, and so it has enormous influences from a range of peoples and institutions around. So each Australian city, whether that's Perth or Brisbane or Melbourne, is very multicultural. International education has become, pre-COVID of course, one of Australia's largest export industries. And there's a real recognition in Australia of the value of that, not just in terms of export income, but value in terms of how international students, whether they're secondary school students or tertiary school students, enrich all of our lives. Australia has become a very multicultural and very interesting and very diverse place, and that's certainly true of all our large cities. And so students that come to these cities have exposure to not just Australian culture, but culture from all over our Asian neighbourhood and all over the world too. That's interestingly combined with the fact that Australia is a first world economy, is a very large and successful economy. I think it's something like the 12th largest in the world. And that means that there are lots of multinationals placed in most of our major cities. And so there's a real benefit to having exposure to those employment opportunities that the international students would enjoy. So yeah, the benefits are really multifold, but it's really about that multicultural outlook and the opportunities that a truly globalised economy like Australia can offer students.
All right, Mr. Kal. So what advice would you offer to a Sri Lankan student contemplating to study in Australia?
Great question. I love this question. It's, I mean, one thing that I've noticed about young Sri Lankans is that they can be quiet to begin with. It takes a little while for them to find their feet, whether that's in conversation in a classroom or lecture theatre. But don't be afraid to speak up. I think they're often very surprised to hear how fascinated Australians are about their perspective, their views. Inevitably, they do find their voice, and when they do, as I said earlier, I think they become very popular. So I think my advice really is look to this opportunity with a great deal of confidence. Sri Lanka is enormously well respected in Australia and many parts of the world now. There's a terrific Sri Lankan diaspora in Australia and other places. Sri Lankan culture and food and outlook and commonalities like cricket, for example, mean that we've got a fair bit of literacy about Sri Lanka, and for the most part, it's very, very good. It can be a bit of a leap in the dark when you transition to another country for international education, but do so with confidence.
All right, Mr. Kal. I hope our students will be able to listen to this and get great advice from you as well. And how would this international-oriented culture benefit a Sri Lankan high school student?
Well, I think, when it comes to the International School of Western Australia, I think it draws on a long history from IIHS of global influence. So IIHS has taught international curriculum for all of its history. And my colleague, Dr. Kithiri, who I believe has been on the program, he's got a tremendous appetite for picking the best ideas from around the world and very, very quickly applying them to a Sri Lankan context. So he's an enormously curious man, but a real knack for listening intently, for learning about best practice and deploying it. And I think he has been a friend of Australia and has come to know many Australian institutions very, very well, and more recently the Western Australian Curriculum Authority, and again has done very well in terms of absorbing the very best of that curriculum, but also making it work in a Sri Lankan context. So I'm very much looking forward to that and that approach, where the best of the world is brought there to Colombo, and I'm very confident that that's going to have some fabulous outcomes for students.
All right, so coming back to ISWA, what backing does ISWA have from the Western Australian government for this project?
Good question. I've been very, very impressed with the way the Western Australian government sets up for these projects. They've been in the game in terms of exporting their curriculum to different parts of Asia for 20, 25 years. So they're very well practiced. They provide, not only is it world-class curriculum, but it's constantly being adapted. They constantly listen to their international partners for feedback in terms of how well it deploys in different cultural contexts. So there's that. So the curriculum is very well set up to begin with, but also adaptation and development is terrifically well resourced. Also, they give us a lot of advice in terms of our HR, and so selection of teachers and management. And we have access to a principals bureau, and that's Western Australian both retired and practicing principals from all over the state of Western Australia that are accessible to us to provide advice about curriculum outcomes, problems that we might be having, areas of development opportunity, extracurriculum opportunities. And that's something that we have already made very good use of and looking forward to making better use of in the future.
Again, Mr. Carl, if a student is interested in joining ISWA, what's the best way that they can get in touch with this institute?
I think take a look at the website. That's you can find it on your search engine, International School of Western Australia, so ISWA, iswa.edu.lk. You can make an inquiry there. Or find the contact details, give us a call. You can make an online inquiry too. That I also believe there's a Facebook page too that students could get in touch with us.
All right, Mr. Carl, so when do you think you'll be back here in Sri Lanka again to make this development a success?
I had my second vaccination jab today, which means hopefully I'm set for travel. But yeah, the Australian government's quite conservative with its border restrictions at the moment. But I'm very, very much looking forward to being back, perhaps later in this year or certainly in the early part of next year. But I cannot wait.
Mr. Carl, when is this exactly starting? From which month, or has it already initiated?
We're taking on our first batch in September of this year.
All right. Okay, Mr. Carl, so unfortunately this is all the time we have for you on the show tonight, and thank you very much for joining with us on Business Best. Hope to see you soon again. Let's keep in touch, and also all the very best, and I hope our students got a very good insight from you. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all on the tonight's episode of Business Best. We'll be back again next week, same time, 7 p.m. on Friday. Don't go anywhere, because the blueprint is up next, where you can get some useful tips and tools on business. I'm Suzanne Shanali. Have a good night.